Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into prayer. Well, not just prayer in the typical way you might think about it, more like prayer as a way to change yourself. And get this, our source material is an episode, a whole episode from a Christian podcast. But we're going to go deeper beyond just the religious stuff to see what we can all take away, even if you're not religious.
That's a really cool angle.
Think of it like we're opening up this toolbox full of ideas and techniques. Some are ancient, some are honestly surprisingly modern.
You got that right.
So are you ready to see how prayer, or maybe we should call it focused intention, might be way more relevant to your life than you thought?
Absolutely. I think it's fascinating, really fascinating, how the source, even though it's rooted in a specific faith, it still manages to connect with those things we all want, right? Like connection, change, peace, the stuff we're all struggling with.
It's true.
And you know what really caught my attention? How they define prayer. It's not about reciting words. It's more about making a connection, a deliberate connection. It's almost like tuning into a frequency you can't hear with your ears.
Okay, I like that. I'm intrigued. But isn't that connection supposed to be with God? How do we explain that to listeners who might not, believe in that whole God thing?
That's where things get really interesting. The source uses this quotes from the Bible about the prayer of a righteous person being powerful. Yeah. But, and here's the key, they emphasize the word righteous, not perfect.
I see.
So it's not about being perfect, flawless. It's more about, aligning yourself with what you think is good, true, morally right. And I think that opens up the concept to a way wider audience, don't you think?
That's true. So it's less about asking some deity for favors and more about your actions matching your values. That almost sounds like, what's the word? Like setting intentions. That's something you hear a lot of self-help people talking about.
Exactly. And you know what? The source actually goes on to give some pretty strong examples of prayer in action from the Bible, like Elijah stopping a drought, or Hannah, her prayers for a child leading to the birth of a prophet.
Okay. Now those stories are pretty dramatic, but I'm guessing you're going to tell me there's a deeper meaning here, right?
Right.
How do these ancient stories connect with someone just living their everyday life today?
Well, think about it. We all face situations where we feel helpless, desperate for things to change. And these stories, whether you take them literally or metaphorically, they speak to this universal human desire for something bigger than ourselves to help us through the tough times. And maybe, just maybe, they hint that focused intention, whether you call it prayer or whatever feels right to you, might actually tap into a power within us to make a change.
Okay, you got me thinking. But the source also talks about personal experiences, right?
Yeah.
Right? How do we explain those to people who are skeptical, who think maybe it's just coincidence?
That's the big question, isn't it? The source, they share this personal story about how prayer seemed to affect their health, their money, their family. But it's important to remember, personal stories are powerful, sure, but they can be subjective, right?
Yeah.
The takeaway isn't to just believe every story as proof. It's more about asking, could there be something more happening here, something more than just random luck? And if so, how can we all learn from those experiences, no matter what we believe?
That's a good point. It's about being open-minded, right? But the source doesn't just talk about the external impact of prayer, how it affects the world around you. They talk about how it changes you internally, too.
Yeah.
Like aligning with God's will. I'm guessing we need to explain that a bit for our listeners who aren't super religious.
Absolutely. In the source, it's about surrendering to this divine plan. But if we translate that, make it more relatable, it's about accepting that there are forces larger than ourselves.
Okay.
Maybe it's the laws of nature, or how we're all connected as humans, or even just admitting we can't control everything.
Right.
Surrender, then, becomes about letting go of those rigid expectations and opening yourself up to possibilities you maybe wouldn't have chosen on your own.
It's a very interesting way to put it. Letting go of control, that's a big theme in mindfulness stuff too. And the source also talks about how prayer strengthens faith. What would you say is the equivalent of that for someone who's not religious?
Think of it as building trust. Trust in your own resilience, in that goodness you have inside, or even trust in how life just, unfolds. It's about believing that even when things are rough, you've got the strength within you to get through it.
I like that. And of course, there's the whole peace aspect of prayer. Seems like everyone is looking for that these days.
Well, because it's a basic human need, right? And whether you find it through traditional prayer, meditation, or just spending time in nature, the benefits are real. Studies have shown that calming practices can really help us mentally, emotionally, even physically.
That's true. Okay, so we're seeing some overlap here between like these ancient practices like prayer and modern self-help stuff. But the source actually goes into some specific steps for having a more fulfilling prayer life. What's the first one they talk about?
Setting aside time, dedicated time for prayer. Now, I know what you're thinking. Who's got time for that? But look at it this way. If something is truly important, you make time for it.
That's true.
Whether it's working out, seeing friends, or nurturing that spiritual side, it's about prioritizing what really matters.
That's so true. We all get the same 24 hours, right? It's about making conscious choices about how we use them. What's the next step they recommend?
Being honest. And I mean really honest. In the source, it's about being honest with God. But if we take out the religious part, it becomes about being totally honest with yourself. How often do we lie to ourselves about how we feel, what we want, even our deepest desires?
Oof, that one hits close to home. I know I'm guilty of that. But wouldn't it be kind of scary to be that honest with yourself?
It can be, definitely,
Yeah.
but it's also incredibly freeing. It's like, imagine clearing out all the clutter in your mind. You're making space for authenticity, for real growth. It's about acknowledging your flaws, all those imperfections, and accepting yourself, the good, the bad, the whole package.
Wow, okay, that's powerful. So we've got setting aside time and being honest. What else does the source suggest?
Welcome back to the deep dive. Before the break, we were talking about those practical steps for a stronger prayer life, like setting aside time and really being honest with ourselves. The source, they suggest praying scripture next. Now, that might sound pretty specific to just one religion, but I think we can reframe it.
Oh yeah, for sure. I was just thinking there has to be a way to apply this even if you're not religious. It can't just be about reciting verses,
Right.
especially if you don't follow the Bible, right?
Exactly. Instead of scripture, think of it more like immersing yourself in wisdom, those traditions that really speak to you. It could be philosophy or poetry, maybe even biographies of people who inspire you, anything that, feeds your soul and offers some guidance.
So it's like you're making your own personal wisdom library, drawing from all these different sources that lift you up and inspire you. I like that. It's about actively going out and looking for guidance, not just waiting around for it to, magically appear.
That's a great way to put it. And that actually leads perfectly into the last step the source mentions, and it might be the toughest one. It's about listening. They talk about listening for God's answer when you pray. So how do we understand that outside of a religious context?
Well, we've talked about mindfulness already. Is that where it all connects, like really connects?
Absolutely. It's about finding that stillness inside yourself, quieting all those thoughts that are always, buzzing around, and just paying attention, not just to what's happening around you, but to those little whispers inside, your intuition, your gut feelings, that voice we often ignore.
That's so true. I am like the queen of overthinking, always analyzing, planning, worrying. It's almost like I'm scared to just be still and listen to what my inner voice is trying to tell me.
And that's the tough part, isn't it? We're surrounded by distractions, bombarded with information all the time. It takes real effort to create space for quiet reflection, to really tune into that inner wisdom. One thing that helps me is to connect these steps back to that righteousness idea we were talking about
Oh,
before.
yeah, good point. That was about aligning yourself with what's good and true. How does that relate to all these practical steps?
Well, when you set aside time to reflect, it's like you're stepping away from the everyday craziness and you can actually assess if your actions are really matching up with your values, right? And then being brutally honest with yourself, that forces you to see where your ideals and your actual behavior might not, quite line up.
Yeah.
Immersing yourself in those wisdom traditions, that gives you the guidance, the inspiration to actually live a more righteous life, a more ethical life.
hmm
And then listening deeply, that's how you tap into that compass inside that points you in the right direction.
Wow, that really does bring it all together, doesn't it? It's like each step kind of builds on the other, pushing you upwards towards more self-awareness, more integrity, and ultimately a life that feels more, well, fulfilling.
Exactly. And that's where the real power of prayer or focused intention really shows up. It's not about magic or, supernatural stuff happening. It's about those small, gradual changes that happen within us when we stick with these practices.
So we've talked about the 4 steps: setting aside time, being honest, immersing yourself in wisdom, and listening deeply. But how do they actually change things in the real world? How does prayer or focused intention really impact our lives?
Now that's the big question. And it's where things get super interesting. The source tells these dramatic stories of healing, miracles even, all because of prayer. And I get it, that might be hard to believe if you're skeptical. But what if, instead of looking for those supernatural interventions, we focus on the changes that happen inside us when we do things like prayer or mindfulness?
Okay, I think I see what you mean. So less about parting the sea, more about the subtle but powerful changes that happen within.
Yes. Think about it. When we take time to reflect quietly, when we're totally honest with ourselves, when we're searching for wisdom and guidance, and when we learn to really listen deeply, what happens?
Well, first of all, I think we start to see ourselves and the world around us much more clearly. We understand our patterns, our strengths and weaknesses. We get clearer about what we value, what really matters to us.
You got it. And that clarity, it's empowering. It's like you're cleaning up a messy room. Suddenly you can breathe, you can move freely, and you can start creating something beautiful in that space.
And I bet it changes how we make decisions, too.
Yeah.
If we're more tuned in to our values and intuition, we're probably going to make choices that feel truer to ourselves, right?
Absolutely. It's like having this inner compass that's guiding you toward what you truly desire instead of just drifting through life on autopilot. And actually, there's a lot of research now, like in psychoneuroimmunology, that shows practices like mindfulness and meditation can really affect our physical and mental health.
Really? So it's not just some fluffy feel-good stuff. There's science behind it.
Yep. Studies show that these practices can lower stress hormones, help you sleep better, boost your immune system, even change the structure of your brain in ways that help you manage your emotions and focus better.
Wow, that's amazing. So even if you're not into spirituality or religion, there are real tangible benefits to doing these things. It's like we're hacking our own biology to feel better. But what about prayer or focused intention affecting the world around us? The source talks about how praying together can bring about positive change. How do we understand that from a less religious point of view?
That's where it gets really fascinating. While the idea of a higher power stepping in might not be for everyone, there's more and more research looking at how our collective intentions might actually influence things like resolving global conflicts, even healing.
Wait, are you saying there's evidence that groups of people focusing their thoughts on something can actually make it happen?
It's still a pretty controversial area of research, but some studies have found some pretty interesting connections, statistically significant connections, between group prayer or meditation and things like lower crime rates or better health in certain groups of people. Now, just to be clear, connection doesn't automatically mean cause and effect, and these studies aren't the final word. But they do make you wonder about how our minds might be connected and if our combined intentions could actually create a ripple effect in the world.
Whoa, okay, my mind is officially blown. So even if you don't believe in a God, there's still this possibility that our thoughts, our intentions, our combined energy can somehow affect the world around us.
Exactly. It's a really cool area to explore, and we're just starting to understand it. But it circles back to that idea of righteousness we talked about before. If aligning ourselves with what's good can have a good effect on our own lives, imagine what could happen if we all focus that intention outwards towards making the world a better place.
That's a powerful thought. It's like we're talking about a global shift in consciousness, a movement towards more compassion, more understanding, more peace.
Precisely. And whether you call it prayer, meditation, or just the power of collective intention, the potential for positive change is huge.
This is something I definitely want to learn more about. Are there any researchers or organizations working in this area that our listeners could check out?
Absolutely. The Institute of Noetic Sciences, or IONS, has been doing some amazing work in this area for decades. They've done tons of studies on the power of consciousness and how it might affect the world. Another one to look into is the Global Coherence Initiative, which focuses on how our heart rhythms are all connected and how that might help create a more peaceful, harmonious world.
Fantastic. We'll make sure to link to those resources in the show notes for everyone. But before we get too lost in all the possibilities, let's be real. Life isn't always easy. What about those times when you pray, you set your intentions, you do everything right, and life still throws you a curveball? How do we reconcile that with this idea that prayer is so powerful?
That's a great question. And actually, the source addresses that directly. They say sometimes the answer to a prayer is no or not yet. And that can be really frustrating, even heartbreaking. But what if those setbacks, those no's and not yets, are actually chances for us to grow?
You're saying there might be a bigger picture that we're just not seeing.
Exactly. It's about letting go, trusting that everything happens for a reason, even if we don't get it right now. It's about having faith, not necessarily in a supernatural being, but in the process of life itself.
Okay, but how do you find that kind of faith when you're hurting, when you're disappointed? It's easy to talk about letting go and trusting when things are going well, but what about when life throws you those curveballs?
That's where resilience comes in. And one way we build resilience is through community. Whether it's your church, a support group, or just close friends and family, having people you can lean on, people to share your burdens with, can make a huge difference.
You're so right. We're not supposed to go through life alone. We need each other to help each other, to celebrate with each other, and to pick each other up when we fall. And sometimes it's in those moments when we're vulnerable, when we let others support us, that we find our greatest strength.
Beautifully said. And that brings us back to the heart of what we've been talking about in this deep dive: connection. Whether it's connecting with a higher power, with our own inner wisdom, or with the support of our community, it's through those connections that we find strength, resilience, and ultimately the power to change.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. We've come a long way from defining prayer to exploring how it might affect both individuals and the world. We even talked about some amazing research suggesting that our collective intentions could actually have a real impact on reality.
And all throughout, we've emphasized that you don't have to follow any specific religion to benefit from these practices. Whether you call it prayer, mindfulness, or just focusing your intention, the key is to find what works for you and to try incorporating these ideas into your own life.
Absolutely. It's not about giving you the answers or telling you what to believe. It's about giving you the tools to explore these concepts, to ask questions, and to discover what works best for you.
So as we wrap up, we want to leave you with this one last thought-provoking question. If prayer or focused intention can have such a big impact on our own lives, what could happen if we all use that power together? Could we create a world filled with more compassion, understanding, and peace? What would it be like to live in a world where the power of prayer, in all its forms, was recognized and embraced as a force for good?
Wow, those are some big questions. Definitely ones worth thinking about as we move forward. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the power of prayer. We hope it sparked your curiosity, inspired you to think about new possibilities, and maybe even challenged some of your old beliefs.
Remember, this is just the start of your journey. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep believing in the power of connection, intention, and the human spirit to transform.
Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep searching, keep discovering, and keep diving deep.
Exactly. It's about surrendering to the mystery of life, trusting that there's a reason for everything, even if we don't understand it in the moment. It's about having faith, not necessarily in a supernatural being, but in the process of life itself. Like even when things are tough, there's a plan, even if we can't see it.
Okay, but how do you find that kind of faith when you're hurting, when you're disappointed? It's easy to talk about letting go and trusting when things are going well, but what about when life throws you those curveballs? Like, how do you actually do that?
That's where resilience comes in. And one way we build resilience is through community, whether it's your church, a support group, or just close friends and family. Having people you can lean on, people to share your burdens with, can make a huge difference. It's like they help you remember you're not alone in those tough times.
You're so right. We're not supposed to go through life alone. We need each other to help each other, to celebrate with each other, and to pick each other up when we fall. And sometimes it's in those moments when we're vulnerable, when we let others support us, that we find our greatest strength. It was like in our weakness, we actually discover how strong we can be.
Beautifully said. And that brings us back to the heart of what we've been talking about in this deep dive, of connection. Whether it's connecting with a higher power, with our own inner wisdom, or with the support of our community, it's through those connections that we find strength, resilience, and ultimately the power to change. It all comes back to that.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. We've come a long way from defining prayer to exploring how it might affect both individuals and the world. We even talked about some amazing research suggesting that our collective intentions could actually have a real impact on reality. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
And all throughout, we've emphasized that you don't have to follow any specific religion to benefit from these practices. It's really for everyone. Whether you call it prayer, mindfulness, or just focusing your intention, the key is to find what works for you and to try incorporating these ideas into your own life. See what happens.
Absolutely. It's not about giving you the answers or telling you what to believe. It's about giving you the tools to explore these concepts, to ask questions, and to discover what works best for you. It's your own personal journey, and that's what makes it so exciting.
So as we wrap up, we want to leave you with this one last thought-provoking question. If prayer or focused intention can have such a big impact on our own lives, what could happen if we all use that power together? Could we create a world filled with more compassion, understanding, and peace? What would it be like to live in a world where the power of prayer, in all its forms, was recognized and embraced as a force for good? Imagine that.
Wow, those are some big questions. Definitely ones worth thinking about as we move forward. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the power of prayer. We hope it sparked your curiosity, inspired you to think about new possibilities, and maybe even challenged some of your old beliefs. It's all about growth, right?
Remember, this is just the start of your journey. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep believing in the power of connection, intention, and the human spirit to transform. And never be afraid to dive deep.
Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep searching, keep discovering, and keep diving deep.